rallying for change inside our state schools. That's what's led as many as 10,000 educators and advocates to the State House today.
This is the beginning, I think, of a major movement in our state.
They came to Columbia to call for change inside the classrooms, impacting the future for both teachers and their students.
She helped me read. She helps me with problems that are really tough.
As the future of an education bill is still uncertain, some lawmakers say this goes well beyond politics.
This isn't about Democrat or Republican, this is about right or wrong.
I've been in your classrooms, I've seen how hard you work, yet the governor don't have no respect for you.
Today, team coverage of the rally, the calls for change, and what happens next.
Are y'all ready for the sentence?
Yes.
Defendant Timothy R. Jones has been found guilty by a jury of his peers of the offense of murder. The jury has recommended that the defendant should be sentenced to death. It is therefore the judgment of the law and the sentence of the court that the defendant Timothy R. Jones Jr. be taken to the South Carolina Department of Corrections, henceforth to be kept in close and safe confinement until the 30th day of November 2019, upon which day between the hours of 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. or upon an order of execution issued by the State Supreme Court of South Carolina, the defendant Timothy R. Jones shall suffer death by electrocution or by lethal injection in a manner consistent and is provided for by the law of South Carolina. Signed today by me, Eugene Griffith Jr. as presiding judge, June 13, 2019.
All right, so you are listening in right now in the Lexington County Courthouse, and what you're seeing on your picture right now, it looks like this is a bailiff in front of us as they are likely escorting Timothy Jones Jr. out after the judge has just signed the verdict handed down, the sentence rather, handed down by the jury in this case, which is the death penalty after they found Timothy Jones Jr. guilty of 5 counts of murder last week of his 5 children back in 2014. And just for a little bit of context for what you just heard, in the past couple of minutes between Judge Eugene Griffith and the defense attorney you heard from, that was Boyd Young, really what you need to take away from that is that Boyd Young was making a couple of different motions, one being for that verdict to be overturned, saying that the jury only deliberated for 2 hours and that it was a jury acting out of passion after they were talking about Dondi, the jury seeing some of those autopsy photographs, as we have talked about, the graphic nature of those. They also had moved for a new trial, and this is one of several times that they have made motions like this in the course of this past month, but this one, of course, coming after the death sentence was handed down by the jury. But you heard Judge Eugene Griffith there deny those motions, and he did sign that verdict that the jury came to earlier this afternoon, which was the death penalty instead of their other option, which was life in prison without the possibility of parole. And
now we officially begin our News at 4 as we continue our coverage of this breaking news in the Timothy Jones Jr. trial. A verdict has been reached. Timothy Jones Jr. is sentenced to death after the jury had made its final deliberations in the sentencing phase.
That's right. This has been a trial that has gone on for a month now. We have been following it every step of the way. Our Caroline Hecker has been inside that courtroom, and Greg Adeline was there as well today. Greg, talking to people who are out and about around town, their reaction to this sentencing. And Caroline has been inside that courtroom again for the entirety of this process. So Caroline, we want to talk to you first. So what can you tell us at this point about what happened both inside and outside the courtroom today?
Well, Sam, it was a short morning for the defense when they gave their closing arguments. It only lasted about 20 or 30 minutes. They had two main takeaways as they worked to spare Timothy Jones Jr.'s life. They pointed to his family history, which was rich with domestic violence, sexual abuse, drugs, and alcohol, and said as a result of Timothy Jones Jr. growing up in that kind of environment, he was therefore a product of that environment. And they also pointed to finding mercy for his family, that it was punishment enough to sentence Timothy Jones Jr. to life in prison without parole, but to spare his family that death sentence and give them mercy, as they have suffered a lot. And we heard a lot of that testimony about generations of tragedy and loss within that family. But when we heard from Solicitor Rick Hubbard, who gave his closing arguments for about an hour, he said it doesn't matter what his upbringing was, because Timothy Jones Jr. made a series of conscious choices in his life, and that his upbringing was not indicative of who he was, that his family recognized very early on that he was brilliant, very smart. He was the first person in the family to get a high school diploma. He was great in education. He went on to college. He got an engineering degree from Mississippi State. He eventually got a job at Intel, which Solicitor Hubbard was a great job, paid $80,000 or $90,000 a year. And so their point to the jury was, it doesn't matter what his upbringing was, he made these choices. And while his family, to the defense, should be spared his life and given mercy, they said it was Timothy Jones Jr.'s ultimate choice to go ahead and inflict that pain onto his family by his actions of murdering his 5 children. So once that wrapped up and the jury was charged, like we were talking about earlier, it took them less than 3 hours. They started about 1 o'clock deliberating, and about 2:45 we got word that a verdict was in, and that verdict being that death sentence. And they found those aggravating factors, which can be a variety of things. One of them was a victim under the age of 11. There were 5 of them in this case. Another one can be multiple victims, and like I said, there were 5 in this case. They also had the chance, if they were looking at mitigating factors such as his upbringing and how he was brought up, but the prosecution proved those aggravating circumstances, and ultimately every single of those 12 jurors signed that death sentence verdict form, which 7 weeks ago, when they were brought in for jury selection under oath, they all said they would be able to do if the facts warranted it. So yeah, guys, that came down in just under 3 hours. Now the last phase, and the guilt innocence phase, it took them about 6 hours to come down with those straight guilty verdicts on the 5 indictments, or in the 5 counts included in that indictment against Timothy Jones Jr.
Caroline, I know you have talked about it extensively for us this afternoon earlier, but now that we have officially started our News at 4 and we're getting some new viewers watching, can you explain how, to the viewers just joining us, Jones being sentenced to death doesn't mean he necessarily goes to death right away? This can take many, many years still.
That's right. South Carolina, first of all, hasn't executed anybody since 2011 due to a shortage of the lethal injection drug. At this point, all of the inmates on death row, there's more than 30 in South Carolina, have all not even exhausted their appeals process, let alone had to have a stay of execution because of the not having the drug. The longest I think someone has been sitting on death row in South Carolina is about 35 years. And so there can be appeals and then appeals on appeals. You can appeal at the state level, you can appeal it at the federal level. And like we were talking about earlier, to give you context, this crime took place almost 5 years ago in 2014. Fast forward to 2019, and we just now completed the trial, I should say. So it just gives you an idea of how slow this process can be and how the appeals will likely be played out in the years to come. And so you're right, it's not, a death sentence is not immediate. Timothy Jones Jr. will certainly spend the next several decades likely incarcerated within the South Carolina Department of Corrections as his attorneys fight those appeals.
All right, our Caroline Hecker has been following this from the very beginning, from those days of jury selection more than a month ago and throughout this trial. So Caroline, we certainly appreciate your coverage. We're going to check back in with you in a little bit. But we want to continue our coverage now with our Greg Adeline, who is standing by. He was also inside the courtroom today. But Greg, I know you've been out and about in the community talking to people. What's been the reaction out there in Lexington?
Well, Sam, we spoke to people here in Lexington before the verdict came down, and many here were somewhat torn over whether Timothy Jones Jr. should be sentenced to death or spend the rest of his life in prison. There were several camps here. There's the camp that says anytime you have a death penalty being weighed, they feel as though it's something that needs to be taken very seriously. And in many cases here, with those who we talked to, they say that they understood the circumstances that the jury was under, understanding that they had a lot to consider in this case. And so something that they took obviously very seriously and ultimately rendered their verdict. But here on the streets of Lexington, those who have been watching this case just still trying to process some of the horrific details in all of this, and others who have watched all of this coverage and have watched this whole process play out say that what happened with Timothy Jones Jr. and what he did to those 5 children is nothing short of just unconscionable. And they believe that the death penalty was warranted in this case. And in fact, one person that we spoke to, we have his sound, he sums up basically the argument that says if the death penalty didn't apply in this case, in what case would the death penalty apply to? Because when you talk about the murder of 5 young children under the age of 8 years old, some here in this community believe that there was no other option for this jury. Take a listen.
I would not take as much time as they have. I guarantee you that. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So, I mean, 5 times for them, 1 time for him. His kids got the death penalty, and so should he.
And back out here live, ultimately the jury did decide that unanimously Timothy Jones Jr. will face the death penalty after the jury rendering that verdict earlier this afternoon. Want to give you a little bit of the lay of the land here outside of the courthouse. We are waiting on Timothy Jones Sr. I was able to talk to him just moments before that verdict came down. Obviously very distraught before the verdict came down, and even after we saw him consoling his son Timothy Jones Jr. And then he and the family left the courtroom. We haven't seen them since. I asked him whether or not he would come out and address the media, and he said that he would like to talk today, but of course with all of the appeals that may likely play out in this case, it's unclear whether or not his counsel will allow him to speak to the media, I should say. Although it is interesting to point out, at least the situation here, that Timothy Jones Sr. did address the media the day that those children were found. So we hope to hear from him today. Let's send it back to you.
Therefore, we want to listen back in. Timothy Jones Jr. was just escorted out of the courtroom. It seems like the judge is addressing counsel now.
Signed the verdict forms and reaffirmed their verdicts orally.
One other thing I would ask is that it's not disproportionate to others.
And
that's not disproportionate to the offense.
Consistent with the fact that percent the court would make a finding, it's not disproportionate to the convictions found by the jury in the defense's phase of 5 deaths. All right. Now the record's closed.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, you're hearing there from Judge Eugene Griffith, who has overseen this entire proceeding here, both of the defense counsel, the prosecution and the defense now exiting the courtroom, and we have had multiple crews in there all day long.
And we'll continue our coverage right after this break. Stay with us.
Have those gusty winds too. We can show you the tower cam, and that's going to be again live outside. You'll see that car right there. Okay, you'll see a couple of. Wait a minute, that's on the corner of Bull and Gervais. Yes. Oh, so this right outside. So this tree has been uprooted. Yes. This tree is uprooted right now over areas outside.
We're trying to get a live shot up now, Chief.
Okay, so we're setting up a live shot. This is intense rain that's going on almost sideways outside, and that is going to be a tree that's uprooted right on the corner of Bull and Gervais streets here in downtown Columbia, outside of our studio at 1111 Bull Street. And so it's blocking Bull Street. I'm not sure if that is, it doesn't look like a station vehicle, but regardless, we have a couple of vehicles there on Bull Street that are now most likely damaged from this tree. And this is just a closer look at it. We have folks who are on the scene right there. That is a really big tree, and we pass by this tree every day, Greg, coming into work.
Yeah, in fact, I just popped out the door of the studio, and literally it's about 20 feet from where we're standing right now. That tree came down, yeah, right at the entrance of the WIS-TV studios. If you step out the door, you can see it very clearly, that tree coming down and blocking Bull Street right now, causing a little bit of damage, you can imagine, to the cars beneath it. But again, a fairly large tree right there, right next to Bull Street, came down in what is now a very heavy thunderstorm moving its way through Columbia right now.
And exactly, this is what we're tracking right now, Greg. This is a tree that, because of some of the winds that we've been telling you about over the past few days, we've been alerting you to this first alert day over the past few days. And this is what we're seeing right over downtown Columbia. Let's zoom in even more, Kevin, if we can, over near Bull Street. And you can tell that we have areas here, and this is going to be this area that we're watching. Okay, so we have Main Street, of course, is going to be in this area here, and we're going to continue watching this heavy rain that's over the area, causing some blinding rain out there. And of course, this is not a great time because I know a lot of folks are probably trying to get off of work. They're trying to go pick up the kids from camp, maybe from a church program. But this is going to be the area, again, that we've seen the tree going down right outside the door. So not that far outside the door here of our main studio in downtown Columbia. So we have this intense rain, also the intense winds in excess of 60 to 70 miles an hour. This is stuff that we can't play with. Can we go back out to that image, though, or one of those pictures that we can show folks what's going on? Because it's very compelling to show folks what's actually going on. Sure. And Caroline is live outside right now to let us know what in the world is going on. It's pretty active.
All right, guys, like you said, we've been talking about, I want you to look down to the corner here. You can hear the sirens coming. We've called 911, but you can see this tree completely uprooted, even with the sod out of the ground here at the corner of Bull and Gervais Streets. We've already got crews out here. They were working with us here in the building on an unrelated matter. They've got a chainsaw out here. We are trying to kind of cut some of these branches down. As you can see, with the look of that tree at its base, it is a very old tree. It's very large around in circumference, and so it's a very active situation. It looks like Columbia Police Department just arrived on scene, but they're trying to clear some of those branches because, believe it or not, there is a car underneath there. We actually just saw the gentleman that was in the car. He walked out. He says he's okay. He's talking to the police right now. You can see Columbia Fire Department right here at the intersection of Bull and Gervais arriving on scene. But it's this work truck you're seeing right here next to the flagpole that we're not sure at this point whether he was driving down Bull Street or if he was parked here, but we know he was inside. But like again, I said, we know that he's okay. So the next thing you're going to have to expect is a lot of traffic delays here at the corner of Bull and Gervais Street. We've got Columbia Police who have part of the intersection blocked off, along with Columbia Fire. And this, like I said, because the tree is just so large, it extends pretty much the entirety across and diameter of Bull Street. So Bull Street here at the corner of Gervais is completely impassable at this point as these crews and some of our own WIS employees work to try to get some of these limbs out of the way. But what I said, like I said, I can confirm that there was a gentleman inside the car when this tree came down, but he is okay. We have seen him get out. He is talking with Columbia Police, refusing medical treatment from what I could hear, and is okay. But this just speaks to what our First Alert weather team has been talking about at length throughout today and the last couple of days, the threat for these damaging winds. And this really speaks to it when you look at the damage that this wind did here in downtown Columbia, just completely upending this very, very large tree here at the corner of Bull and Gervais. So these crews here, as you can see, are going to be at this for a while just because of the sheer size of this tree that has fallen. Maybe we're trying to get a little bit better look here at the crews that are working with the chainsaw, and it looks like maybe some hedging clippers, something to that effect, to clear. I think their first priority, it looks like, is to get a lot of these branches off of this work truck that is parked on the street here on Bull Street at this meter. So that's what it looks like they're doing right now. They've got a couple of tools here. But again, avoid this area. We know that that afternoon commute is coming, but this Bull and Gervais intersection is a mess right now just because Columbia Police and Columbia Fire have got to block this off while we work to get some of this out of the road, at least some of these smaller branches. And then, of course, the removal process of the base of the tree, the larger part of the tree, will take some time too. So if this is part of your drive home, just remember to be patient. And as these storms continue to move through, right now, rain's coming down pretty good. And interestingly, I'm looking at the flagpoles and the wind has somewhat subsided. But like I've said, this just speaks to the power and how quickly something so life-threatening can happen with these damaging winds. Guys, if you want to keep the picture up, I kind of want to send it back to you. I'm going to kind of move around and see if we can get a better angle here. Maybe you can come back to us here in a second.
And Caroline, if you can hear me, I was wondering about those first responders. I mean, I know that tree went down just a few moments ago, and it looks like people responded pretty quickly. I don't know if those were people who were in the area who just rushed to help the gentleman. I saw somebody in a military uniform. So Caroline will work to talk to the folks out there to get a sense of who was on the ground. We know that CPD has already responded. Again, Bull Street blocked off. This is right in front of WIS at the corner of Bull and Gervais. And for those who may just be tuning in, Caroline pointed out that there was a man in that vehicle. You see that huge tree sitting on top of it, but we're told that he seems to be okay.
Yeah, no injuries reported in all of this, and it is worth noting, as you mentioned, just right outside the studio, had it fallen probably, I don't know, 20, 30 feet the other way, it could have come right into the building, Dominus.